So I want to talk about how the eye translates information about the world into a language that the brain can understand. So let's trace the path that a single photon of light takes as it travels through the eye. Photons are particles of light that carry information. The first structure that the photon encounters is the cornea, which is the clear outer covering of the eye. Because it's curved, it's going to readjust the path of the photon and help aim it at the back of the eye, which is the light sensitive or photosensitive surface. After hitting the cornea, the photon is going to pass through the anterior segment, which is just the space between the cornea and the lens that's filled with aqueous humor. The humors of the eye are fluids. The aqueous humor also has a role in redirecting the path of the photon toward the back of the eye. In addition to that, it maintains the pressure within the eye, the intraocular pressure. If this fluid doesn't drain, it drains via this scleral venous sinus and circulate properly, it increases the pressure within the eye, which contributes to the condition called glaucoma. So after the photon passes through this anterior segment, it then passes through the pupil, which is the hole or the opening in the iris. The iris is the colored part. So when you say someone has beautiful blue eyes or brown eyes, you're talking about their iris. It's actually a muscular structure that can expand and contract to change the size of the pupil. This allows more or fewer photons to come into the back of the eye. And this is important because if you're in a low lighting condition, you want as many of these light particles to pass to the back of the eye. But if it's really bright, you don't need or want all of those photons. So the purpose of the iris and the pupil is to control how many photons enter. Behind the iris and pupil, right up against the pupil, is the lens. The lens is the structure that does the bulk of the work, directing the photons toward the back. What's really interesting about the lens is it can change its shape depending on what you're trying to focus on. If you're looking far away, it's going to have a different shape than if you're looking close. This is because the photons have to follow a slightly different path to get to the back of the eye or the retina, which is the photosensitive surface. A little known fact about the retina is that it's actually part of your brain, even though it's in your eye. This is because it contains neural tissue. The retina contains cells called photoreceptors, which are the rods and the cones. These cells have one end that contains pigment, the pigmented layer. The other end synapses with other cells in the eye that transmit the information to the brain. Shown here are the bipolar cells. There's a third type of neurocell called the ganglion cells. Synapses are junctions between cells of the brain. So this is how neural impulses get transmitted or propagated, in this case from the eye to the brain. There are two types of these photoreceptor cells. Again, the rods and cones. The rods function really well in low light conditions. They can fire with a single photon. They're also bigger. They sample a larger area, so they're low resolution cells. The rods are more numerous at the periphery of the eye. You can kind of see that here. So they function in peripheral vision. Cones, on the other hand, are really good in bright light conditions. They need more energy to fire. They also allow us to see color. The cones are located in highest concentration in the fovea centralis, our central point of vision, which is in the macula lutea. This part of the eye is directly in line with the pupil. So the cones function in our visual acuity. You may have heard of macular degeneration. This is the part of the eye that's affected, is this macula lutea. People lose their central point of vision first if they suffer from macular degeneration. Another structure that I want to point out is the optic disc. This is also known as our blind spot. This is called the blind spot because there are no rods and cones in this part of the eye. It's where the retinal arteries and veins enter and exit the eye.